All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the first COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Committee meeting at the City of Vincent. I'll declare the meeting open at 5:03 p.m. and start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have 3 items on the agenda this evening, and we do have all 3 council members of the COVID committee here and present. That is myself, Councillor Susan Gontaszewski and Councillor Alex Castle. And I note that we also have some of our other council members observing this evening, so welcome to those. And we have our staff members present as well to answer any questions. And so we don't have any apologies this evening. I'll just go to the CEO. Could you just please advise whether we've had any public questions received for this committee meeting, CEO?
To you, Mayor Cole, no, none received for the committee meeting.
Thank you. Okay. And this being our first, we don't have any responses to previous questions taken on notice. So I'll go to declarations of interest. Our CEO or Councillor Gontaszewski or Councillor Castle, are there any declarations of interest for this meeting? No, there are none. Okay. So, and any requests for applications for leave of absence? No, there are none. We don't have to confirm previous minutes. Again, this being our first meeting, so we'll go to item 7, which is business arising. And the first item is 7.1 COVID-19 weekly update. CEO, do any of the staff members wish to speak on this item?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might ask Mark Fellows, who's leading the COVID response, to comment on this item.
Okay.
Through you, Mayor Cole. This item provides a summary of the overview of how the city is managing the public health response and the effects of that economic, social, environmental in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has recently emerged. Up until now, there's been very regular directives coming from the federal and state governments for us to manage and on our feet very quickly. I hope that this item...
Can I just jump in there? Can everyone hear Mark? I'm just finding it a bit faint, Mark. I wondered if you could maybe move your microphone closer to where you're speaking, if that might work.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I've had several conversations with Mark online in the last 2 days, and we do have an audio issue with Mark, so
okay.
That'll absolutely be fixed by the next meeting, but I'll just ask Mark to
okay.
speak up.
Well, if Mark, if you could use your best big voice, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm moving myself closer to the microphone. So I just wanted to highlight that this weekly update, which we'll be providing to the committee every week, really details how the city is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Up until now, we've been largely led by directives both from the federal government and the state government, which have occurred every 2 to 3 days. For now, it's been around 10 days since we've had our last directive. So this weekly report really captures up until that point when the gathering limit was capped at 2, and that was after many businesses had to close. So what this report is about is detailing our response, but also the economic, social, environmental impacts that we're managing as part of the COVID-19 response. And it explains the city's approach to how we're managing COVID-19 within our operations, both internally and externally.
Okay, just thank you very much for that, Manager of Built Environment and Wellness. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you. So I'll just get a mover and seconder for this item. Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle. And council members, do you have any questions on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I guess I just was interested in the how the Parks team and Rangers have fared in monitoring the public spaces in relation to education and engagement with community members, given that we're seeing an increased use of our public spaces during this time that our some of our town centres are a little bit quieter, well, a lot quieter, unfortunately. Just how that's gone and how there's what sort of thought is likely to occur over the Easter weekend and how some of that increased usage would be managed in relation to the directives around public gatherings.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's an excellent question. The Rangers team is really, they will be doing an update for the committee next week to explain exactly how their team is operating since COVID has become part of our business. And that has essentially involved a change from focusing on matters such as parking to really focusing on educating the community and getting that message out there in a face-to-face fashion to our residents and community who are using our parks. What we're doing during this time is gathering information and data to actually look at which parks may have more people going through it so that we can have more of a targeted approach and use that resource most effectively. And we're also looking at additional strategies to implement within our public spaces whereby now people, or they can do, one of the things they can do that's left to do is to exercise in public. And so that's something that we're managing on an ongoing basis. So we've got the data to support that approach.
Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I have a similar question. I'm just wondering, one of the points that's noted is that we're most of our communication's obviously happening online now, but also in person where practical to do so. And I'm just wondering what the city is doing or considering doing to communicate with people who might not have access to online communications. There's obviously portions of the community that might struggle to get the information through our Facebook or website or email. And, you know, we've had other ways of dealing with that in the past. How are we dealing with that now?
Through you, Mayor Cole. We have addressed some of those issues in the implementation plan. So one of the focus areas is to look at the more vulnerable people in the community, and I would consider that to be people who don't have access to online messaging. I think that this particular piece of work is a bit of requires a bit more in-depth discussion to work out precisely how we're going to do that, because as you may be aware, our seniors programs, for example, have been significantly affected and moving away from face-to-face, and obviously computer literacy is a bit of a challenge there. So we're currently looking at the options for managing that. I guess that's something that we can include in our future reports to the committee.
Look, I just wanted to ask a question, Manager, in relation to parks and playgrounds. And I wanted to say thank you for the bunting flags that have been put around the playground at Hyde Park today. In terms of those parks in smaller playgrounds in smaller parks where we don't have fenced playgrounds, we haven't been able to cable tie the gate closed and have that enclosed playground. Is the use of the orange flags around those other playgrounds going to be rolled out across the city, or is that just being used for the big playgrounds that attract quite sizable people to them at this point?
To you, Mayor Cole, I mentioned before that we're collecting data as the number of people who are going to each of the playgrounds, and that's why we have selected the Hyde Park playground as one that should have the bunting around it. We haven't had a significant amount of data to suggest that there's a similar magnitude of an issue with playgrounds in other parts of the city. So we can definitely assess that data on an ongoing basis, and if there are areas where we see a high degree of playground usage, then we can consider that as an approach.
Thank you. I did have some comments today from understand why the playgrounds are closed, so it actually can help parents manage littler children who are more prone to sort of run naturally towards play equipment. It breaks my heart that we're in a situation where we're closing off playground equipment, but understand absolutely why it has to be done. But I think that the perspective from a parent of a younger child, that visual barrier helps with them with a child stopping and them being able to explain why the playground is not available. I also just wanted to ask your thoughts on I know you're talking about data collection, which is fantastic, but is that sort of also being considered in terms of use of paths and whether we may need to move to a one-way system around our paths at some of our busier parks like Hyde Park?
Yeah, to you, Mayor Cole, that's definitely been considered for Hyde Park. It's definitely our most trafficked park in terms of pedestrian traffic. If we're able to implement a one-way system, then that would minimise that the social distancing aspect of it. So that's something that is currently in the pipeline that we're considering at the moment. So one way around Hyde Park, clockwise or anti-clockwise.
That's really good to hear. I'm just very conscious of the fact that we have the Easter weekend upon us, and that might be something that we need to consider potentially more urgently, because I think that could lead to having more people visiting Hyde Park in particular, and some of our other reserves as well. So perhaps just consider that. The other thing that I just wanted to know is about maintenance of toilets being opened. Any thoughts in relation to that?
Through Mayor Cole, I can take that if you can hear me okay. So all our public toilets are currently open. We've increased the cleaning to twice a day in Hyde Park, in reflection of the fact that there are more people in Hyde Park and in preparation for Easter, so we've done that. We're just looking at our other public toilets to decide what to do. We're not sure whether, at this stage, whether some of them could be closed because they're hardly used, particularly in parks that are mainly used for sporting activity. That's our thinking. We were speaking to Victoria Park. They've done it that way. They've done targeted closures of toilets which are hardly used. So we are just considering that at the moment. Obviously, there is a public health risk in keeping them open. It's minor, and it does require potentially extra cleaning. So we're just wondering whether we should at least consider closing some of them, but we haven't closed any at this stage.
Thank you. Can I just request that if it does come to closures, that the committee is informed so that we're aware of where that's happening? Because, for example, as locals, we might bring a perspective. For example, Menzies Reserve may be seen as something that's very well utilised for sport, but with sport not being played there, it's automatically filled by dog walkers, community members, people just, having all of their options to do indoor gym and exercise removed. So it probably does need to be considered in terms of that community perspective. And I appreciate also that data is being collected, because I think we will see general uptick in use of all of our parks and reserves during this time. Were there any other questions on this item? Councillor Castle?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I just have one more. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure who is the right person to answer this, but what role the city is going to play in assisting members of the public who might want to, report social distancing not happening. I had a query about this from a community member today, and what our role might be where residents have seen gatherings happening and want to make a report. Are we liaising with the police in that matter, or do we have any enforcement role to play there?
Mark's going to answer that question, but just before I go to Mark, I just wanted to let you know that WELGA has been holding weekly briefings, as I'm sure you're all aware, for local government mayors and CEOs. And at the last meeting on Friday webinar, we had the Deputy Police Commissioner, and I did ask whether there was any thought that rangers would be asked to take on additional powers during this time, and his answer was no. He felt that between the WA Police Force, with assistance from the ADF, they were managing their role well. So I just wanted to mention that before I go to the manager.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I think you're commenced to answer the question. We do take queries and concerns from the public, and we do action them. So I've mentioned what happens in our parks, but also in our local businesses, we have our environmental health teams who are going out and supporting local businesses as well. As we don't have enforcement powers and those powers rest with WA Police, our approach is much more of an educative approach. And we do have escalation criteria in place, but we've found that in pretty much the majority of cases, people will respond very quickly and that they will amend their behaviour.
Council members, any other questions? Well, just before we leave this item, I'll just mention that today, with the assistance of the CEO and the Manager for Community and Business, I've sent a letter to Patrick Gorman, MP member for Perth, and also to Minister Christian Porter, just in relation to the JobKeeper payments for local government. We are continuing to be told that they won't be extended to JobKeeper to local governments, but that there's still a case to be argued around the business operations of local government. For us, it's Beatty Park Leisure Centre. For others, it's not just aquatic and sports facilities, but also childcare and things like that. So that advocacy is happening in the background and still very much a live discussion that's happening. So I just wanted to update you on that. So if there are no other questions, or if any of the administration wish to provide any further comments? No? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Next item is 7.2. This is review of guidelines for electronic council proceedings. Can I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Castle moved, Councillor Bonchevsky seconded. Any questions or comments?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. In relation to clause 1, there's mention of live streaming but no mention of recordings of meetings, and I'm just wondering if, given that now we will have meetings such as workshops and audit committee meetings which can be recorded, will they be recorded, or will that, even though they're not going to be live streamed, or will that happen? That's my first question. Do you want me to go through all of them or deal with them one by one?
Who will be answering these questions? Would you like all of the questions, CEO, or would you like them one at a time?
Through you, Mayor Cole, why don't we go through all the questions, and the Manager for Governance first question. I think she might have just moved screens about the fact that we will have a recording and keep that up on the website as well. Maluka, did you want to comment on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we are investigating different ways to record these meetings. So one option is a webinar. We did try and test that and it didn't work last week, and we've now got a new licence. So we're hoping to actually be able to record it instead of having people participate and then stream it onto our website like we used to, we'll actually have people participating in the Zoom meeting but having controls over what they can say and when they can speak. So if that goes ahead successfully, then we will need to change a few of these guidelines to align, and we're looking at doing a full review of our policy on briefings, meetings and forums, and updating that to align with our approach for the electronic meetings. So I guess at the moment we're still testing, which is why these guidelines are sort of just a general to cover how we're conducting these meetings. But if things change and we are able to move to probably a better option, which would be the webinar option, then we'll have to review these guidelines again and actually update our policy.
Okay, thanks. Some of these are really just comments. The end of clause 2, where it deals with questions and statements to be read out during public question time. I know this may change particularly if we're able to move to different platforms and different methods, but as it currently stands, it's just a comment that we need to make sure that we're very clear to the community the difference between sending in a comment to be read out and just sending an email to a councillor, because that happens now as a matter of course. And I guess it's making sure that the members of the public know that their comment will be read out and getting their permission, which I know you're already doing, but it's really just noting that needs to happen. Then at the end of clause 3, I don't know if you're teasing us, but your examples are that leave of absence could be for holiday or interstate work commitments, none of which can happen right now. So it was really just a comment. In clause 4, there's a discussion about what happens when an elected member has to leave the meeting. And I just wondered if it might be worth including a definition of what leaving the meeting means. Does that just mean turning off audio and video, or does it mean leaving the room? Does it, if we were in chamber and we had a financial interest, we would actually have to leave the room where we can't hear debate happening. So that might need some consideration for the future. At the end, clause 6, where we talk about technical difficulties, I think we might need to consider a mechanism for how we would advise the community if the presiding member has a technical difficulty, or if the entire live stream has a technical difficulty, so that they can see on the website or on the live stream why there's nothing happening, if the mayor's not able to advise that someone's connection's dropped out, etc. And then just a question which you can consider at some point is, if a councillor is unable to attend the meeting, an entire meeting due to technical difficulties, how will we record their absence, or how will we deal with that situation where it's an unusual absence? And I think that is all of my questions and comments.
Through you, Mayor Cole. They're all good points. It's probably best if we look into them further, especially if we're going to change to a webinar format, because that will change the process slightly. And at this stage, we're just asking the committee to note these guidelines, really to cover the conduct of the committee today. And then when we do undertake some more work and we've ironed out how we're going to be conducting these electronic meetings, then we can update them and put them to council for approval. I know they are an agenda item for council tonight as well, but we may have to look at that because there could be some things that need to be changed slightly along the lines that you've just raised.
Councillor Gontaszewski, do you have any questions?
No, I had raised an issue in relation to the consideration of accepting questions and comments via video rather than having them read out. I think it perhaps affords people the opportunity to ensure they can fit as much as they can into their 3 minutes, and is more reflective of the process that we would have during a council proceedings in the chamber. So I think that's something that we should certainly consider going forward. But other than that, I didn't have any other significant comments in relation to the document.
Thank you, Councillor Gonchevsky. I just had a question. I know that in the guidelines it refers to related policy procedures and documents, and it does mention the city's meeting procedures local law. But the question is, should that not be referred to more expressly within the guidelines to say that the local law does still apply, and where there are sections here that may be in addition to, that's fine. But if there's anything in the meeting procedures that this alters, just to perhaps mention which clauses, like for example, where our current meeting procedures, I can't recall off the top of my head whether they talk about remote meetings, etc. And this actually replaces that. Then I think we do need to actually be clear that even though we're having online meetings, all of the procedural elements of the meeting procedures do still apply.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can review, and there are some areas where it's now inconsistent because our meeting procedures local law didn't contemplate electronic meetings, so we can review that and make reference to the areas where it differs.
Yeah, so perhaps if it could consider saying something that, that the meeting procedures apply except for these provisions, just so that's pretty clear. So we still have our standards when we're holding the electronic meetings in the same way that we would in the chamber. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Moving to our third item for tonight's agenda, which is 7.3, Implementation Plan Update. Let's get a mover and seconder, and then I'll see if a member of administration wants to update. Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gonchevsky. CEO, does a member of the administration wish to provide an update?
The manager
report
policy
as read, but just if you wanted to add anything.
Manager policy in place might like to comment, in particularly around the small business support measures that are being announced by the federal and state government.
Yeah, thank you, CEO. Through you, Mayor Cole. Just to note that, as we've mentioned in the report, the city and council members met with representatives from our town teams and the town team movement last week, and we'll be having more regular catch-ups with that group as the COVID-19 pandemic evolves and the impacts on our local economy and businesses is continuously being better understood. We've included 4 new actions in the implementation plan to address some of the ideas and suggestions that were raised in that meeting. So they're new things that we've been working on since that meeting. There was an announcement. I understand that one of the key issues that's facing our local businesses is an issue around paying rents when their business has been forced to close as a result of various social distancing restrictions. There was an announcement made, I think about an hour ago, from the National Cabinet. So we're going to be reviewing that announcement very closely to understand how that might impact on our local business community and our landlords, and we'll be targeting advocacy that we do on that issue in response to that.
Thank you, Manager. Yes, that's probably the first significant announcement we've seen in relation to landlords and rents, which will be of great assistance to our local businesses. So it'd be very helpful to unpack that so we fully understand it, and then also help communicate that through to our businesses who are impacted. Council members, any comments? Moved by Councillor Castle. Do you wish to speak to it or ask questions?
I have a question through you, Mayor Cole. Just around the timing of how we're going to receive these updates going forward. I noticed that on the implementation plan that we have in front of us, the weekly update is from the 1st of April, which is now almost a week old. Is there any way that we could tighten that time frame, given that the agendas will have to be put out in advance, so that, you know, things are moving so quickly at the moment, so that that's perhaps a bit more up to date, because going through those actions, I could see that we had already commenced on many of the things that wasn't reflected in the table.
Through you, Mayor Cole, this meeting tonight was the first run through the meeting format for next week. We'll issue the agenda papers on Thursday in lieu of the Friday and Monday public holidays, so that'll be 2 days. And then for the meeting the following Tuesday night, we'll still aim to release the papers on Friday in advance of the Tuesday meeting, and we'll circulate information updates to committee members and council as a whole for anything urgent that arises and whether or not that needs a discussion in between the weekly meetings.
Okay, thank you.
My one comment on that might be that it seems that the frequency and magnitude of announcements is slowing at the moment, and we might be entering into more of a steady state around some of the major rules and regulations, but the key issue at the moment is to bed down the impacts on businesses and renters and landlords who and people who have been affected by either JobKeeper or the job seeker announcement. So hopefully those parameters are confirmed as soon as possible and preferably in our favour.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And I just had one question around, I'm trying to find what number it is, around the flu vaccination campaign. And just wondering if we have an idea about when that might commence, as I noticed that a lot of pharmacies and doctor surgeries are already taking bookings for flu vaccinations, and whether we have a plan to commence that soon, and also if we're offering support to any of those local pharmacies and GPs.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the flu vaccines have recently been released. The initial priority is to have them available for people over 65, but it is available to the general community. So we are looking at doing some campaigning in April, so this month, to pretty much raise awareness around the flu vaccinations, and that can include where people can access flu vaccinations as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Just to follow up on that question, I note that I can't remember exactly which suburb, but it's towards Fremantle Way. One of the local clinics is providing drive-through flu vaccinations in the car park. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on if we had local surgeries interested in doing that, whether we could potentially provide them with car parks like the Loftus Community Centre car park, which has got quite good entry and exit point system.
To you, Mayor Cole, we can definitely consider that proposal as we're going through and engaging with our local flu vax providers.
Thank you. Councillor Gontaszewski, do you have any comments or questions? There's just a few things I wanted to seek administration's thoughts on adding to the list. Well, we've already talked about the fact that we're doing parks monitoring for potential further distancing measures, so that would be a good one to add, given that that's happening. And also just wanted to ask the Director of Community and Business if she would be happy to have added investigation of rate smoothing payments, which is similar to the Bayswater model, where they allow their rates to be paid more regularly, even fortnightly, and not just for hardship customers, but more generally.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have looked at putting that into our budget process, so I'm very happy to have that added.
Thank you. Then also I know a body of work that's underway that could also be added whilst it's not finalised, but just to indicate to our community that this work is happening, is the development of the Vincent Community Support Network. Yes, that's okay.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if this really sits under here, but I think the ability to demonstrate to our community what timelines we're looking at for additional review of the 1920 budget in terms of our time frame, and also a time frame around the what we're sort of aiming for with budget adoption for 2021, because if you kind of consider that state and federal governments have been talking about when they'll be adopting their budgets, and I know we don't have the same freedoms that they do, because if we don't put out rate notices, we don't have the ability to operate. But I think it would just be quite useful to give the community an indication of the timeframes that we're aiming for, knowing that that's a big body of work and that's probably some of the critical work that's now happening, and that might be subject to change. But I think it would be a good thing to be able to indicate those sorts of timeframes to the community, even if they have to change.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy for those timeframes to be in this plan and transparent for the community.
Thank you, Director. Were there any other comments, council members, before I put the item, or any comments from administration? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. So that was our last item for this evening for our first. Oh no, I'm very sorry. That's not correct. We have 7.4. I'm very sorry for missing this. Community and social impact on sporting clubs and associations. Can I have a mover and seconder? Only two people that can do it. Move Councillor Gonczewski, seconded Councillor Castle. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Gonczewski, or ask questions?
Oh no, just to note that the report contains some overarching information around some of the state government relief measures that have been put in place for organisations, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the eligibility criteria for these, as I'm hopeful that they can be beneficial for a number of the organisations that operate within Vincent.
Councillor Castle.
I have a very quick question. I just want to confirm that the rent relief that we've offered that's set out in the tables is until 30 September 2020.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's what we are proposing, and that it's a 6-month period through to the 30th September.
Councillor Castle, do you have anything further? Just a question on roughly how many of our community groups have contacted us and requested relief as opposed to a blanket approach?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think I was having a look at the requests today, and from memory there was probably about 12 organisations, so roughly a dozen organisations that have contacted us, and we're currently working through all of those requests, and we will bring back to this committee our suggestions in terms of particular activities to ensure that it's got the support of council.
So at the moment, is administration favouring a blanket approach, or looking at a capacity to pay approach?
We're doing suggesting a mixture of the two. So for category 1 and 2, we're thinking a blanket approach. We're suggesting that applies to all community groups, and that for a 6-month period has a financial impact to the city of about $13,000. And then for category 3 is commercial businesses. Category 4 is state government leased venues, city properties leased by state government. So we're just currently working through those. at the moment, we're considering some general principles and then the opportunity to do some modification within that based on capacity to pay.
I'm just wondering if there'll be any requirements to demonstrate, for example, would sporting groups need to demonstrate that they haven't taken fees from players or, to run for the season? So, for example, if the club players had decided that they would pay the fees and that they would remain with the club, would we take a different view to those clubs that had refunded registration fees? And are we giving consideration to Lottery West grants also?
So through you, Mayor Cole, with the category 1 and 2, we are suggesting that we would probably take a fairly unilateral approach there just for simplicity's sake. And we will cover the lease costs, but we're suggesting that for those groups we would point them to Lotteries West and other subsidies to support them where it's where they need additional support in addition to what we are providing. And then for the commercial businesses, we would probably be looking at focusing on their leases as tenants, and then working through the other requirements of their leases on a case-by-case basis. And, of course, pointing them towards other subsidies that are available, such as JobKeeper and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you, Director. Council members, any other comments or questions? No? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. That brings us to item 7.5. Town Team Collaboration and Business Support Update. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. I'm just going to go to the Manager of Policy and Place. We've touched on this previously. I don't know whether you wish to provide any more information on this particular item.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, just to provide a further update, we have started putting together the business directory and looking at what the best opportunity will be to start that, what will hopefully be a nice conversation, essentially sharing information between the city and all of our businesses. So we've started putting together that database. I'll be looking at some sort of e-newsletter or something in that vein shortly. We've also started speaking with some businesses in regards to the business health checks. We developed a few draft questions and wanted to road test those. So our place managers have been discussing those with a few local businesses to just make sure that the questions are appropriate before we roll them out to a broader audience. That's probably the key update that I'd like to provide for tonight, but definitely looking to further review the announcement today from the National Cabinet in regards to the rent relief issue.
Thank you very much, Manager. Much appreciated. Council members, it was moved by Councillor Castle. Do you wish to speak to it or ask any questions?
Oh, just very briefly, we have talked about this before, but really just to note that that we will be getting a lot of information from the town teams, but we will also need to do a lot of work to make sure we capture those businesses that are outside the town centres, in particular the ones that don't have a shop front or a public-facing office, that those ones we often don't even know about, and they may be feeling the effects as well. So that might take a little bit of extra digging to find their details, but that's really important to include them.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Gontaszewski? No. Also, just because it's been in the news today, we have heard that the Flying Scotsman may be closing their doors and has had difficulties negotiating a new lease. And I just wanted to let you know that our place manager has been in contact with the business owner. I have tried several different modes of channels to contact the business owner, made it clear that we are here to talk to if they want us to help with any advocacy, and we also plan to reach out to the landlord. So we have definitely made offers in that regard, but we don't know the full situation. So just to update you on that, given that is an iconic business in our Burford Street Town Centre. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? Declare it carried. That takes us to general business. Any general business to raise at this point? No, okay. And item 9 is the next meeting, and if you can see in the agenda there, it does list some of the items that will be coming to the next meeting. So obviously the COVID-19 weekly update will be a standing item, and I take Councillor Castle's point that it would be good to have as update that's as live as possible, even if we have to issue one with the meeting papers and then follow up with a revised. We're going to go to homeless sector update, rent abatement and other relief measures, which has already been raised this evening, given that we've had that key announcement today. Local government response to COVID-19, I'm assuming that's a general sector response, because there is some work being undertaken by WELGA which does impact all or help all local governments, so that would be useful. Service delivery update from Ranger Services, noting that our Rangers are really moving from really sort of focusing on community safety at the moment, and community partnerships update on strategy and implementation plan actions. So I'm not sure whether, because we have, I've just sort of flagged the Vincent Community Support Network, I'm not sure if it will be developed, given that we also have Easter, we have 4 days in the midst of this in the next meeting, but that might be an item. And I think that also council members, if you wish to raise items that you would like updates on, that's an opportunity also for you to indicate which items you would like to receive an update on, raise to discuss, or just get a time frame on, so that can also happen from week to week as well. So there being no further items, this being our first meeting of the COVID committee, and we've almost filled the hour before we have our council meeting coming up next at 6 p.m. But thank you all for your attendance, and I declare the meeting closed at 5:50 p.m. Thank you.